hands if you have made a New Year's resolution for 2019. Raise your hands, okay. Statistically, you are one of 45% of Americans who make New Year's resolutions every year. Now, out of this 45%, 80% of people fail to stick to their New Year's resolution by the second week of February. January 12th has been termed as Quitter's Day. And only 8% actually complete their New Year's resolution. 8%. But why, right? Why? So I went down the rabbit hole of the internet trying to just find out what is going on. Why do people fail to make their New Year's resolution? I think all of these reasons can be summed up under two reasons. Reason number one is this. It's called false hope syndrome. So one of the major reasons why most people fail to keep their New Year's resolution is because of an unrealistic expectation or expectations about the likely speed, amount, ease, or consequence of changed behaviors. So the lie that many internalize as truth, watch this, during the season is that their desire for change is greater than their reality. In other words, people overestimate their desires and underestimate their reality. Does that make sense? Reason number two. The second thing is called effective forecasting. And effective forecasting is just a fancy way of describing how many of us tend to use how we feel in the moment to predict how we will be in the future. So the lie here that they internalize, or most people internalize, is that desire for change is reality. The common denominator in both those reasons I just mentioned is this thing called desire. You are a being characterized by desire. We all have desires. We all have needs, wants, and cravings. Now, hear me out. One of the most important doctrines, if I want to put it this way, doctrines of the secular culture is that desire is divine. When the human being is untethered from a larger story of reality, when you pursue a life outside of the meaningful story of a creator who created us with the capacity to love and a capacity for love, watch this, we then become our own God. And then we worship desire. Okay, so complete this phrase for me. It's from the New Testament. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. Now, in the secular mindset, when there's no God, your body then becomes the temple of you. You become your own church, and then fulfilling your desires then becomes your worship. Even well-intentioned believers of God can have a battle of desires within themselves. And if you're not careful, desire can become your God. So what happens when desire is God? First thing that happens is dissatisfaction. Because you see, desires are infinite. You're never going to come to a point where you're not going to desire. You're always going to want something. So if fulfilling your desires become your God, then you will always want something and hence never be satisfied. Second thing that happens, really quick, disintegration. That's your second blank. When satisfying our feelings and desires become the most important thing in our lives, then we're going to experience imbalance and dysfunction in our lives. Any addiction, for example, is this dysfunctional, irrational drive to go from one hit to the next. And when expectation does not match reality, we get things like loneliness and anxiety and insecurity. Why? Because you want that thing so bad. You go from one thing to the next and one thing to the next, and you're like, man. And the last thing that happens, I think, one of the things is imprisonment. That's the last thing. When desire becomes your God, then you become your own prisoner. The illusion is that you're free. When in reality, you're actually held captive by your ever-changing desires. When tech changes, you change. When fashion changes, you change. The place of your deepest desire is also the place of your greatest joy. So for example, if the source of your deepest desire is popularity, like that's what you really want, then that becomes the source of your greatest joy. If the source of your deepest desire is financial stability, then that becomes your source of the greatest joy. But if the source of your deepest desire is Jesus, then He becomes for you the source of your greatest joy. The thing about Jesus is this. He is going to be God whether you like it or not. God is going to be God independent of our want or need of Him. But we decide what we want God to be in our lives. So what do? It's so dismal. Desire. Oh my gosh, what do? On the one hand, we have the idolizing of desire, meaning that desire is our God. And some people say the solution to that is get rid of all desires. Awkward problems with that too, because even the desire to reject all desire is itself a desire. So it's like, okay, awkward, right? Like, it's what do you do? You know? And I'm so glad Jesus says something else. This is Jesus saying to his disciples, if you cling to your life, you will lose it. But if you give up your life for me, you will find it. When Jesus is talking about life, he's not just talking about your religious life. Very important. But he's talking about this whole life, all of it. Because in the Bible, there's no distinction between your religious life and your non-religious life. Your church self or your work self. Your Sabbath school self or your high school self. There's no distinction. All of it is life. So when Jesus is asking to give up your life, he's asking to submit all areas of your life to him. What does that look like, right? It's still like, man, I don't get it. But what does that look like? I love how one of my favorite authors, Dallas Willard, puts it. He says self-denial means to give up the project of being the ultimate point of reference in your life. That the issue is not that you have desires, but whether you're controlled by them. And you know you're controlled by these desires based on how much they affect your joy and your peace. You know, at first glance, when Jesus is asking us to do these things, it sounds ridiculous. Someone might say the cost of following Jesus is too much. It's too much. I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to do this, I have to go here, I have to do this, I have to eat this, there's so many different things. Oh my God, what do you do? But can we pause to consider, I'm so passionate about this, can we pause to consider the cost of non-discipleship to Jesus? Disintegrated life, a dissatisfied life, a life without aim or purpose. It is hard. The Christian life is hard. It is hard. It is difficult. But it is worth it. Amen. It is absolutely worth it, man. That's why Augustine, an early Christian philosopher, prays to God. I think he gets it. This is one of my favorite prayers. One line. He says, you have made us for yourself all, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Think about your heart just like fluttering. It's like, I want this. Strive for this and that. And it's like, so Augustine is saying in a place of contentment, man, my heart is restless until it rests in you.